At the heart of them is family and traditions that are being trampled and dissolved. And if I find it interesting because I feel like there's a theme here, and we've invited Trevor Alcorn on our program from Tridentine Brewing, TridentineBrewing.com, to be our guest to talk about the history of brewing, talk about tradition and family. Good morning to you, Trevor.
Morning, Joe.
Praise be to God.
Thanks for having me.
We're glad you're here. Thank you for your time today. It's a little too early to be drinking beer, but we can talk about it anyway. We can't be drunk. It's not yet 9 a.m., as the famous St. Peter once said. Praise be to God. You probably heard that joke probably a billion times. But at any rate, let's talk about Tridentine Brewing real quick first. Tell me about your company and what it is you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. So this is right now, at least right now, it is a home brewing initiative that my family runs. So not quite a company yet, although we do have aspirations to turn it into a commercial brewery at some point, God willing. But really, it's a family initiative, father and sons, my father and my brother working together to brew beer for the greater glory of God. So that's nice. Really our motto, and that's what we strive to do.
And where are you guys based out of?
We're based about 60 miles south of Chicago.
I see. And so in order to enjoy your beer, one would have to be hanging out at your house at this point, at this stage of the game.
Yes, either hanging out at the house or a really good friend. So unfortunately, due to government regulations, we can't sell the beer, although we can give it away for different charity events or church events and things of that nature.
Yeah, I have a friend who does something very similar, but with wine. They label their own wine, and on the day that they bottle the wine, is whatever feast day that day is what makes the label. So
that's cool.
It's and it's good wine. We've enjoyed it over the years. Praise be to God. And so it's something very similar. Why did you and your dad and your brother want to get into brewing? Have you always been a beer connoisseur?
Yes. So always been a beer connoisseur, especially craft beer. And really, it's something that was long time in our family, especially with our my paternal grandfather and then my father, who had been brewing for many years, but really started out about 8 years ago. We really got into brewing, and really just took off from there. And then we decided, okay, let's go ahead and also brand this thing, at least for ourselves. And so we went with Tridentine Brewing, really just to highlight our Catholic faith and to do, as I said, something before, for the greater glory of God. So sometimes we do, we do something similar to your friend that you had mentioned, Joe, about with the wine, labeling something for the saint that it was bottled on. So typically we have beers either that are patriotic in nature, or more typically for a saint or for Our Lady or for our Lord.
Trevor, it's super interesting. I think the best part about Tridentine Brewing is the fact that most people will never be able to try your beer, very unfortunate, but the labels send such a message that on social media has become very popular, and I'm looking forward to the day where people can purchase your labels as like magnets and stickers, things like that, because it's pretty amazing the designs on them, and they really tell a story. Could you talk a little bit about y'all's labels, since we're talking about that?
Yes, of course, Adrian. So the labeling and the designs, it's really a fun, interesting collaborative process that we have in the family, and with my brother, who's a graphic designer by trade. So he helps us with all of our design, creating all of our labels, our logos, our website. And it's something that we also look to collaborate with artists on, Catholic artists. So for example, Tracy L. Christensen of Portraits of Saints and Chris Lewis of Veritas Catholic. We've partnered with both of those artists as well to feature their artwork front and center on some of our labels. So that's really something that when we give the beer away to people, to family, to friends, we want that to be a conversation starter about the faith. And so really having that beautiful artwork is really key and very important for us. And so, Adrian, as you were mentioning as well, we are looking at very soon this summer, actually having some type of an online store where people want to buy any of the labeling, because unfortunately we can't sell the beer because there's been such an interest level, as you said, in the labeling, that they'll be able to do that at TridentineBrewing.com. But store is yet to be open, but we're looking forward to that.
What's the startup cost? Give me an idea of what it would take to go from nothing to a company that can sell its beer across the country.
Oh, wow. Okay. So probably several $100,000 US, bare minimum, I would say. Selling across the country, though, unfortunately, is something that is a bit more complex. It is possible, but we have very, let's just say, more puritanical laws in these United States regarding beer and brewing, and that's something that has a few more hoops to jump through regarding selling it across state lines. So it's relatively easy if you have a brewery to sell in your state, and then it just, when it comes to selling across state lines, you have to deal with distributors, and then you can partner with certain distributors where you can ship alcohol. So there are breweries that do that. So that is a possibility, and that's something that we would like to do down the line, is to be able to ship the beer, directly to individuals.
Yeah, I can imagine. Rudy?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this, in California and really all over the country. I've noticed that there have been breweries that start a small little restaurant, and they have a brewery offset there. Have you ever considered doing anything like that in your hometown?
So yes, it's definitely been a consideration. Now, one of the things about most breweries that have a restaurant attached to it is a lot of the times the restaurants actually have a higher failure rate than the brewery, and it can sometimes take the brewery down with it. So you'll quite often see many breweries that pop up now that actually will bring in, for example, food trucks, and so they don't even necessarily sell food on site. So I think if we're going to go that route, that's probably at least initially what we would do. But to get this venture off the ground, what we were thinking of doing is partnering with another brewery and doing what's called co-brewing, which is you work with that brewer under their license. You still have everything branded under your name, but you work under their license and brew on their equipment, and you can sell that way. And so that's something that we were looking at doing initially. But to answer your question, Rudy, it is possible. We were looking into potentially doing something like that, but probably without the restaurant, to be honest.
That's a pretty good deal, and maybe a great way to get started sooner rather than later. But I guess then we'll have to just book coach buses up to the Illinois area to be able to taste this good stuff. Praise be to God. I want to get into the history of brewing, the tradition of brewing, especially from a Catholic perspective. I find it very fascinating because, as I said before the break, I really see the world struggling with its traditions. I mean, in the church, we know that the Pope has issued Traditionis Custodes, and there's been a big conflict there within the church. But I think in the greater world, too, I think this is part of the reason why the Dutch farmers are protesting, and the Canadians, and over the weekend, Kenya, Sri Lanka, Argentina, China even. I mean, so many. So what is it with the history of beer brewing from a Catholic perspective?
Yes, I mean, beer brewing from a Catholic perspective really goes back to the foundation of the world. I guess we could even say back to the Old Testament, where beer was even offered in the temple as an offering to our Lord. So it goes back that far. But really, from, let's just say, a Catholic perspective, it goes really back to the tradition of the monks. Starting as early, I mean, we have documented evidence starting as early as 700 AD that the monks were brewing beer. We know that they were brewing beer prior to that, but really the monks were the great catalyst behind Catholic brewing and beer as you know it today. So beer in the ancient world from Egyptian times was something more like a slurry that you would drink through a straw, actually, like a milkshake. So monks actually were the driving force behind refining beer. And what you know today is beer is all because of the Catholic Church and because of monks. Yeah. And so monks totally refined that process. And over the years, created many of the styles that we know today for beer. And so beer, especially the craft beer, I guess, counter revolution, you could say, that's happened, especially in these United States, where it went from maybe a very bland type of Pilsner beer that was on the market, it seemed like, from Prohibition up until the 1990s, to this explosion of different types of beer. And really, that's just reclaiming what our, I guess you could say, patrimony of sorts with beer, and really what was passed down to us, because beer is, let's just say, very similar in many ways, liturgically in the Catholic Church, where we have a cycle of things and a rich history. It's very, very similar with beer. There's always a cycle for the types of beers that are traditional for the time of year. There's many different styles that have roots that go back hundreds and hundreds of years. So really, it's a great tradition. And brewing is great to get into, because you really have this connection with the past and with our Catholic faith.
I'll never forget learning that my confirmation saint, St. Padre Pio, loved beer. And I when the first time I heard that, I'm like, really? Like, that seems weird to me. But I didn't at the time know, way back then, I did not know about the history of brewing, especially when it comes to monks. But yeah, he loved beer. He loved to hang out with the guys and drink a beer and have good conversation during rec time. And who knew? Praise be to God. And I find it very fascinating, because so many cultures have their traditions. I lived in Germany for a while as a kid, and of course, the German culture around beer is huge. I mean, every fall they have a big beer festival, and people come from all over the world to enjoy that. Why? I mean, like, it seems like, again, I go back to my premise about, I think the world is struggling with its traditions, and it seems to have lost most of these traditions or abandoned them. Why should we celebrate the history of and tradition from a Catholic perspective on beer brewing?
Well, I'd say that we should celebrate that tradition because, well, first of all, it is our tradition. I would say that the Catholic Church celebrates tradition with a capital T in many things, her liturgy, her faith, what's been handed down to us. So that also makes sense in regards to other things that are not purely of the faith, but really have been something that the church itself, so many things, whether it's education or healthcare, beer even, that you might not initially think of, has passed something down to us and has given us something. And so it is worth preserving. And especially once one tries to get into these different types of beers, one can really appreciate all the various styles and the traditions associated with the stories even. So it's absolutely worth preserving. And I would say the last, very similar to some things that have happened in the church the last, I'll just say the 20th century. I think we saw very similar things happen with beer. So it's great to see that revival where we're bringing back those traditions. It's got some great parallels.
Absolutely. It kind of, whenever I think about drinking, I just remember the story of St. Augustine and St. Dominic. And St. Dominic, he was he wanted to do so much penance that he would not drink anything but water. And water, that was unheard of because, water was not very good for you back then. It was often make you sick. And so he was forced to have a little bit of wine. And so he would mix the wine with the water to make the wine taste gross. And but then St. Augustine, a similar situation. He was a Manichaean, and Manichaeans hated all good things. And so they hated the material world. So when he converted to Catholicism, people were very skeptical of St. Augustine and were saying, oh, this guy, he's anti-alcohol, is not Catholic. And to prove that he was not a heretic and did not believe that alcohol was evil, he would make sure at least once a year to have some alcohol in front of all of his congregation. So in front of the people, he'd make sure to have at least once a year publicly consume alcohol. And I think that's very important for us to know. As a Catholic, you can abstain from alcohol. That's no problem whatsoever. If you have, for whatever reason, desire not to drink, then there's no problem there. But the problem becomes whenever you have an idea, this puritanical idea, that alcohol is evil per se. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, certainly, I 100% agree with you, Adrian, that, first of all, abstinence from alcohol, whether, in total, for what, if it's a penance or maybe that's been a past struggle in your life that you want to give it up, I think that's great. It's even great periodically to fast, certainly, for example, during Lent or other times of the year. So there's a great Catholic tradition in abstaining as well. But certainly, I think, from the Old Testament to our Lord's first miracle at the wedding feast of Cana, all throughout, monastic history, there's a great, Catholic tradition of brewing and drinking alcohol in moderation, and to use it to build friendships and to strengthen those as well. So I think that, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's alcohol. It needs to be in its proper place. It's not something obviously we should abuse, but of course, taking a break every now and then at the very least is a good thing as well.
Trevor, I'm thinking during this conversation, the church really does have the best things. It really produces the best things, and beer is one of those great things. I'm wondering, in the history of brewing, you probably went through all kinds of different aspects of brewing, from stories to recipes and all this sort of things. What would you say is the most interesting story that you've come around, encountered when it comes to brewing from a Catholic perspective?
Yes. So at least, well, I'll give you one story, which is there was monks. I believe that this is in the 1500s, and my apologies for not having the exact name of the Pope, but I do know that a Pope had heard how great these German monks, actually they're Franciscans in Germany, how good their beer was. So he actually asked them to send him some beer because he wanted to try it. So they sent him a barrel of beer, and of course back then, because this is 500 years ago, they had to transport it over the Alps, and by the time it got to the Pope, it had spoiled, and the Pope tried it, and he thought it was horrible. So he thought, "Oh, this is horrible. Go ahead, have as much beer as you want from now on. It must be a penance, so have it all throughout Lent if you'd like, even, because this is so horrible."
That's great. I was just thinking, when you're young and you drink beer, you drink cheap beer, right? Because that's all you can afford, But there's no excuse for adult males to be drinking light beer, Keystone, or something like that, right?
Light.
We got to have some good stuff here. So in the last couple of minutes before we have to say goodbye, what is your favorite beer, and what is your least favorite beer?
Ooh. Yeah, Joe. So my most favorite beer would have to be one that we brewed, which is called Dies Irae Imperial Stout. And so, yeah, I'm partial to stouts and porters. It has a very rich, robust taste, can quite often have chocolate, coffee flavors to it.
Yes.
Very malty. Yeah, there we go. You can see that on the screen. For those that are watching, that's our beer right there. So that's actually my favorite. It's won several homebrewing awards when we've entered it throughout the country. Probably my least favorite beer. There are several beers that are, I'd say, overly hoppy. So there are some extreme
IPAs.
Extreme hoppy. Adrian doesn't like the IPAs, but I
totally
like some
biased,
IPAs in moderation. Yeah. So yeah, that if we had there's some triple IPAs. I mean, it gets extreme. I think IPAs in their proper place are good. They're quite often overused, certainly with many craft breweries now. But that's probably my least favorite, would be an extreme version of an IPA.
And the reason why they have so much hops in them was they had a practical reason, right?
They did have a practical reason. So it was invented really in the 18th century by the British to ship down to their colony in India. Thus the name India Pale Ale. So the British loaded up the beer with hops. Hops acts as a preservative. Mm-hmm. And so that's why there was this overwhelming hop taste to it, because they just needed the beer for practical reasons to be able to not spoil on the long journey to India.
On the boat ride.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Makes sense. Poor Adrian. He's got a war against IPAs for some odd reason. But all right. Well, praise be to God. We're down to it now. TridenTineBrewing.com. TridenTine. TridenTineBrewing.com. Thank you for your time today, Trevor. It was so good to talk to you. We enjoyed our conversation with you. God bless you. God love you. Have a great day, sir. All right. That is going to do it for hour number one. Great conversation with Trevor and, of course, Kian Bexty about those protests all across the world. If you can join us in the second hour, we'd love to have you. Not only do we have a very special Fear and Trembling prize pack to give away, but also Mark Out from the Kingsmen will be our guest coming up in just a few minutes. Otherwise, we'll see you back here tomorrow morning. God bless you and God love you.